Good evening, everyone, and thank you for giving up your Tuesday evening to come and listen to this middle-aged, confused man. I am middle-aged and I'm definitely confused. My talk today is going to focus around the complexities and the overlap between Islam, the religion of Islam, or a religious version of Islam, identity, the complexity, absolute pivotal core necessity and play of identity, and young people around this very vicinity. I mean, when Dr. Ahmadullah asked me to give a speak or come and talk to his audience or our audience, and he said it was going to be in the Idea Store, I couldn't think of a more appropriate and better place, because iconically and symbolically it's located in the hub, the nexus of the local Bangladeshi community of East London. Now, these issues are very complex, serious and dynamic, and I would argue, they affect us all. Affect us all not just as local community members, but affect us all as human beings. I'm using the Bangladeshi community as a case study, but I would argue, and I still argue, that these issues, in fact, affect us all. And it's a global story of migration, essentially. What happens to a community when they migrate en masse to another world, another new community? What happens to them? How do they accommodate? What's the tensions they experience? What are the intercultural, intergenerational issues they experience? What happens in terms of their national identity, their linguistic identity, their religious, their gender, their youth identities? And these issues affect us all. Whether you're from the African Caribbean, the Gujarati, the Pakistani, the white working class communities, I would argue that even the white affluent middle class communities, these issues affect us all. And I, like many of you, I would argue, remain perplexed and confused, because I see it happen around me and I have no answers. And us academics, we always pose questions, but we never give answers. So I'm going to pose more questions over the course of the next half an hour to 40 minutes. I will speak for 30 to 40 minutes, and then I do want to open it up to you people over here, so you can ask me questions and ask each other questions, perhaps. And I'm also going to disappoint you from the very beginning, because I don't have any answers or solutions. And although in recent times I've been speaking in the media quite a lot about this problem of ISIS, this global problem of ISIS, the talk today focuses more around issues of local area community politics. ISIS, to me, doesn't play a role in local area politics. And often when I get asked on news or radio, why did these 3 young girls from Bethnal Green go and join the ISIS movement, the answer I give to them is, A, I don't know because I'm not them, and B, I don't know, right? But what I can offer you is an insight, perhaps, of what it means to be young Bangladeshi and being born and bred in the East End of London. So the focus of this talk is not around ISIS, or indeed the controversial prevent agenda, which I've also been speaking about. But afterwards, in our discussion afterwards, I'll be happy to take questions, and maybe we can have a group conversation around these issues. Right, so if I may, let me start with a journey. I'm going to share a journey with you all here, a story. So, I first met Tayyiba at a youth centre in Poplar in 2006. She was the friend of someone who was a regular at the youth club. She had led a somewhat traumatic life. Only 17, she had left her family home and lived in a women's refuge. She had grown up in a deprived East London estate, and she tells me of the racism she encountered within her estate and also within the school playgrounds. She had fallen out with her family, started to self-harm, drink alcohol, and by her own admission, she started to hang around with the wrong crowd. She was a much troubled soul, reserved, shy, timid, and at first didn't speak much to me. But over time, I won her over. We became friends. We built a relationship upon the tenets of trust, respect, and honesty. She started to open up to me. She started to talk to me. She wanted to tell me her story of what it meant to be a young British-born Bangladeshi girl. Her best friend Lippy, and this is not Lippy, this is an image taken from Google, but she represents a figure, a symbolic figure of someone who was Lippy. Her best friend Lippy was in total contrast. On the face of it, the representation of Lippy was a figure who was withdrawn, subjugated, angry perhaps, dominated, it is argued, by our political leaders and the media, dominated by the men in her lives. She wore the full face veil, the niqab, like the woman in this image. And when I first met her, I, being a Bangladeshi man, born in Bangladesh, raised in the East End of London, having friends and family members who resemble Lippy, I also felt a nervousness around Lippy. I did not know how to greet her or how to speak to her. She quickly put this to rest by extending her own hands and shaking it and saying, "Aminul, I don't bite." She was a colourful character, intelligent, career-focused and full of life. She was a good friend to Tayyiba, just exactly what she needed. Lippy, this character, this protagonist, drove a sports car with tinted windows. She listened to Tupac and Jay-Z, and as she reminded me during a very interesting and long conversation in a shisha bar in the Mile End, I quote, "Even though I wear the niqab, Aminul, my clothing underneath comes from Topshop and Miss Selfridges. And you may not notice it, but I actually have some very expensive high heels on." And at that point, she lifts the bottom of her jilbab and she shows me her high heels. Now, these two stories of Tayyiba and Lippy provide us with a snapshot, an insight into the everyday reality of what it means to be British-born and Bangladeshi. Despite many cultural, linguistic and religious differences to the wider British mainstream society, whatever this term Britishness means, is highly problematic. We see it being thrown down our faces on a routine basis, and now problematically in our school curriculum. What does it mean to be British? Is there one definition of it? And arguably the British Muslim community have become engulfed in this debate, and they've been asked to make a choice. You either are British or Muslim. You cannot be both. They've been somewhat positioned as oppositional. So despite being constructed as the British or the un-British Muslim other, the narratives and the stories and the histories of Tayyiba and Lippy remind us in a very unique way that they are in fact British. Their stories are somewhat typical of growing up in a deprived jungle like East London. Their stories are very human, very normal, full of tragedy, contradictions, complexity, comedy and hope. Their stories also remind us of the diversity within the British Bangladeshi community. That is an absolute and a myth to speak about a unified Bangladesh community, as if that everybody in the Bangladeshi community think the same, behave the same, have similar cultural values, have similar class and backgrounds, and have similar aspirations and chances. Just like it's a fallacy to talk about this unified, monolithic British Muslim community. We know that there are 2.7 million Muslims in this country as of the last census, and we also know that they're divided by geography, caste, sect, nationality, language, and so on. So it's really problematic when we hear our leaders speak about this community as if we all think the same. So what it highlights, their stories highlights that despite these cultural similarities, there are differences. They are very London, or very East London, shall I say, and crucially is their story remind us that they, like most other teenagers and young people from across the UK, are quite fashionable, trendy, angry, exuberant, intelligent, and perhaps disengaged. So what is my study, my book about? My ethnographic study is a 5-year in-depth research into the lives and identities of 6 British-born Bangladeshis from the East End of London. Now the number 6, it's not a magical number, but it's a small number, and that was deliberate. It was deliberate in the sense that I come from a qualitative sociological schooling educational background, academic background, and the emphasis was on quality, in-depth, narratives, history, rapport, trust, as opposed to quantity. But the exercise wasn't around, I spoke to 300 young Bangladeshis, 90% of whom said this and 20% of whom said this. The focus was more about the in-depth life stories of a small group of individuals. Now, I spent much time with these 6 individuals, engaged in many in-depth interviews, repeat interviews and observations. It's a human story of migration, and we get a sense of how it feels to be a minority within a majority situation, seeing the world through the perspective of the minority. This is how it feels to be me. This is how it feels to be us. We hear other people write about us routinely. As Dr. Ahmadullah said right at the beginning, it's a story, unfortunately, that's forever in the news. But do they actually spend time with the people that they write about? How does it feel to be them through their perspective? We hear of their everyday complexities directly from themselves. We hear about their everyday. They tell me about their childhood memories, family, culture, religion, community, peers, schooling, fears, aspirations. They introduce me to their boyfriends, girlfriends, families, teachers, youth workers, and so on. In one very comical incident, just to give you an illustration of the depth and the breadth of experiences I had with these young people, in one very comical incident, one young man was so eager for me to meet his girlfriend, and was very excited for me to meet his girlfriend, that he actually invited me on a dinner date. And I spent 2 hours in Bethnal Green Road in Nando's sharing a chicken platter with him and his girlfriend. And that was quite comical, but also very insightful. I locate their narrative, their story within the wider social politics of what it means to be Bangladeshi, the whole politics of Islamophobia. We've only seen in the last week the explosion of Islamophobia in the British transportation system. We've seen YouTube videos going viral about tragically targeting very weak, very vulnerable people who don't speak the language of English, and we've seen the structured racist Islamophobia that's geared towards this community just because they wear a headscarf or they have facial hair. The Britishness question, we explored this. What does it mean to be British from their perspective? I also locate their stories within the narratives of deprivation and alienation, which is unfortunately one of the core issues our community experiences here in the East End of London. They gave me an insight into their lives. They told me honest, interesting and genuine accounts of what it means to be British, Bangladeshi and Muslim in the year 2015. So what were some of these stories? They tell me many things over the course of 5-6 years. And as I analysed their stories and their narratives, these were some of the common issues emerging from their stories. From spending time with their families, from speaking to their school teachers, from going on a dinner date to Nando's, and so forth. Dislocation, alienation, exclusion, upheaval, struggle, poverty, deprivation, living in a period of austerity, affecting all young people, I would argue. Disengagement, disconnection from language and culture. I'm not going to speak about language and culture in this discussion, in today's talk, but it was a common theme, it was a worryingly common theme that's emerged. The young British-born Bangladeshis do not speak Sylheti Bengali. They speak a modern, westernised, diluted, watered version of what they call Banglish. And we all do it, some of us, I do it. We speak English, and within the context of speaking English, we throw in some Bengali words. It's become natural to speak in such a language. Now, of course, the problem with this is our Sylheti ancestors, our Sylheti first and second generation, who hugely come from the oral tradition, highly illiterate, most of the rural Sylheti community, their version of their communication version, how they communicate with others, is historically through oral tradition. They sit their children on their laps and they tell them stories, right? And their children then tell their children stories. That's how it has been for generations, the oral tradition. Now here for the very first time, this tradition is being completely lost and completely diluted. And it's mainly because there's a disconnection in language. So when these young people do go back to Bangladesh, and I'll speak about this later on, the rhetoric has shifted from being a place where our ancestors, our first and second generation fathers and uncles and grandparents saw it as a place where they call home, affectionately. We are going back home in a very metaphorical, in a very romantic, reminiscent way. The language that the young people use is we're going on holiday. So that it's shifted from home to holiday. It's a place of vacation, and they see it as a temporary stay, 1 to 2 weeks max, right? And there's also the physical disconnection of, this is a place, Bangladesh as a country is a physical space where there's no technology, there's no internet access. There's open sewage, there's drainage, there's mosquitoes everywhere. The food, there's no chicken and chip shops, right? This is the reality of what it means to be an East London Bangladeshi. So when they go to Bangladesh and the reality hits them, for some, the notion of a ancestral connection to a motherland is there. But for the majority, the practical realities of no internet connection and their cousins, some of their cousins wanting to marry them, is enough for them to say, I need to get back to home. Home being East London. So there is that complexity of the disconnection between language and culture. Racism is rife. Racism, ladies and gentlemen, I'm disappointed and also wanting to remind you, everyone, that racism still exists in the year 2015. It may not exist like the way my father experienced. It may not be the overt racism of the 70s and 60s where stones were thrown through the window or they were spat at or beaten up or routinely chased home after work. It's not the overt racism we're speaking about. We're speaking a much more subtle, covert, institutionalized, complex version of racism. Harder to detect, harder to put your finger on. And it doesn't revolve around the saying, you're black, go back to where you come from. It's the politics and the racism of difference. I'm not racist, but I just don't understand why you do this. I don't understand why you wear a headscarf or why you eat with your hands or why on earth would you want to have an arranged marriage? Yeah? It's as if the notion of an arranged marriage is so complex and alien and different that it represents something which is un-British. That all people who are westernized and enlightened and British only marry somebody they fall in love with. And even then, he comes on a white horse and he charms their pants off them. And they fall in love and they live happily ever after. And if you don't fit into that model of romantic love, and you fit into something different, then you are somehow different or un-British. So racism exists. And we're going to hear some narrative later on how racism does exist, even in the year 2006, 7, 8, when I spoke to many of these young people. The complexity of home as this abstract space. Is it the four walls that we live in? Of the overcrowded home in the neighbouring Collingwood estate, or Shadwell, or the Chickson estate? Is it that place? Is it East London? Is it London? Do they feel this sense of home once they leave the comfort zone of East London? Is it Bangladesh? Is it the UK? Where is home for them? I asked them this question. And of course the question of Britishness, what does it mean to them? Indeed, what does it mean to us? There's about 20 of us here now, and I would be willing to wager a bet here that everybody here will have a different definition of what it means to be British. Yeah, it's really difficult to find a uniform definition that fits the identities of 64 odd million people in this country. Challenge of integration, the social role of Islam, not the theological role. I'm not theologian, I'm not an imam. Yep, this study was ethnographic and sociological. Yes, there is a degree of theology involved, and I've read, and I'm also a Muslim. I was born into a Muslim heritage, a Muslim background. I'm very proud of my background, I'm very proud of my religion, but I focus on the social role of Islam, not the negative roles of extremism and radicalization and ISIS and prevent. Yeah, because this isn't the daily reality for many of these young people. I speak to them and they tell me something completely different. And also the multiple meanings of the headscarf, this garment, this cloth that many of our young women are wearing in the East End of London. What does it mean to them? The common popular narrative is one of oppression and subjugation and force and coercion. But when we speak to these young people, what does it actually mean to them? What does it represent to them? And I retell some of their stories. And I put this in bold towards the end, the two most common factors emerging from all of the narratives is this sense of non-belonging and also questions of identity. What does it mean to them to be British, Bangladeshi and Muslim? So this identity crisis of non-belonging is, I'm just crudely using images to illustrate their conundrum. Are they British? Paul Gilroy wrote in 1987 a famous study called "There Ain't No Black in the Union Jack," in the sense that many black Britons are excluded from this notion of being British. And indeed, there is no black in the Union Jack. He's speaking metaphorically, but you get the sense of what he means. Are they Bangladeshi? Are they Muslim? Are they from London? Are they from East London? Interestingly, if you ever type in East London in Google, this image emerges. The image of the Robin Hood estate. One of deprivation, one of poverty, one of alienation. Identity as a concept, as something that we sometimes routinely think about, sometimes we think about it even unknowingly, is complex. And I take the viewpoint that identity is postmodern, the postmodern identity. It's fluid, it's dynamic, it's multifaceted, it's diverse, it's always in flux, it's never static, it's open to change, and it can be contested by people who own it. It's a project from birth to death. And is it predetermined? Are we born into an identity, or do we construct it as we live our lives? And I guess the crucial question which many sociologists of identity ask, it's not about who we are, but what we are not. It's not about who we are, but what we are not. Now think about that question. And sometimes, when I speak to my students at university, sometimes I put some binary opposites to illustrate this question. So, I'm not a woman, therefore I'm a man. I'm not homosexual, therefore I'm heterosexual. We tend to construct identities through what we are not, as opposed to who we are. Identity is also situational, intersectional, and multifaceted. And it operates through a paradoxical prism of sameness and difference. I'm same as some people, but I'm also different to them. Right? So the notorious American feminist writer and thinker, Bell Hooks, illustrates this point very eloquently. She talks about the fact that we are women. She speaks from a very feminist, staunch feminist position. We are women, but I'm also a black woman. As a black woman, I have different challenges. And the people who write in the name of feminism, on behalf of for all women, have historically and predominantly been middle-class white women. So do you speak about my experience? Of course you don't. So we may be the same in terms of we have a gendered, feminine, female space, and we share that, but we're also different within this sameness. And of course you can apply this to the Bangladeshi community. We're Bangladeshi, but there are immense differences within the notion of what it means to be Bangladeshi. And Stuart Hall talks about the idea of representation, which is crucial in our understanding of identity. How we view ourselves is important, but how we are represented, perhaps, is even more so. So let me use my own personal story. I see myself as a very handsome, middle-class, middle-aged man. That's my personal, subjective, biased opinion. But when I walk through many airports around the world, many airports, I and my family are always randomly checked. Randomly checked, and we go to countries where not many Muslims or South Asians go to, because we have friends in places like Mexico, Puerto Rico, parts of the Caribbean. I'm not showing off here, it does cost a lot of money to go there, but we have close friends, so we go and visit them. And so in the line people queuing up to check in, we are one of the very few non-white people in the group. We're not going to Egypt or Dubai or Bangladesh or India, where in the line most of the people are South Asians or of Muslim origin perhaps. So we stick out. And within this line, we are always randomly checked. Can you accompany us to this room, sir? You have been chosen for a random security check. So we take it on the chin, right? Me and my family, me and my wife and kids, we leave that extra hour early to get to the airport because we know we are going to be randomly checked. So my representation is one that represents a threat. I represent a threat to something or someone. I view myself as something completely different to how I've been represented as. And one of the social experiment that many of you can do, if you're weird and boring and strange like me, spend some time outside Stratford International Station, if you've got a few hours to kill, on any day, And just observe the types of people that get stopped by the police for random stop and searches. Just observe and tick the boxes that these young people tick, right? And you will get a sense of what it means to be young Asian and South Asian and living in the East End of London. So the complexity of home is pivotal for these young people. One 19-year-old argues, I have a right to be British. I was born and raised here. No one can take that right away from me. Taiba, age 17, says, we would constantly hear things as go back to your own country, you don't belong here. Where do we actually belong if we don't belong here? She asked me this question. Why can't I be white? I used to ask my mum. I used to scrub myself hard. I used to ask my mum to bleach me. I used to ask my mum to bleach me. This was a 17-year-old speaking to me in 2007. Not in 1971 or 65, but 2007. Born and raised in Stepney. They keep on telling me to go back to where I come from. I was born here. I am 100% British. Where is it exactly that I'm supposed to go back to? A 15-year-old asked me this question. It's a rhetorical question, but it's a very important question. She asked me that question. Where is it exactly that I am supposed to go back to? And I had no answer for her. So here is the conundrum of non-belonging. It's the common migrant story. They're not being considered as being British because of cultural, religious differences and the colour of their skin. And now, because they form this Islamic other, a threat to national security or what it means to be British. When they go back to Bangladesh, they see it as a holiday and not home. Here in this very community, there is a cultural and a linguistic gap between themselves and their parents and grandparents. Right? In the eyes of many grandparents and parents, the young people are seen as too westernized. You've become too westernized. You've become too like them. This is them versus us rhetoric. And when they do go back to Bangladesh, they're dismissed as tourists, Londoners, and British. So in a sense, they have no home. They don't know where to go to. And I argue, or the question is, where do they go? And I argue, the space in the last 15, 20 years has been filled by a very positive, vibrant version of what it means to be Muslim. Right? Islam has come in and occupied this space, this conundrum of non-belonging, of home, and has given them a sense of belonging and a sense of acceptance. And of course, it offers them a very social manifesto of how to live your lives. And of course, the appeal of Islam is historical, it's powerful. There is no passport, there is no race, there is no class, there is no nation. You're connected to this global, imagined ummah, as many Muslims, as we call it, this global Muslim community. And it becomes very powerful in narrating and governing the lives of many, not all young Bangladeshis, but many young Bangladeshis. And we see the same story happening in the suburbs of Paris with many young French-born Algerians, or in the streets of Hamburg with many German-born Turkish, or in the streets and the homes and the compounds of Chicago and New York with many African Americans. The role of Islam as a way of countering the negativities and alienation they've experienced, and the conundrum of non-belonging and the complexity of identity. A new Islam for a new generation. Here in the very streets of Whitechapel here, we see images of young people who are conflating their Adidas trendy bags with the thobe, the Islamic look. We have Muslim female-only beauty salons. Half of my life, it seems now, is spent parked outside these venues where I'm taking my wife to get her hair or eyebrows or nails done, and it seems I should do a separate study on this issue itself. Here we see a group of young boys just playing in the local park, just conversing, just socializing, but wearing an Islamic thobe. Here we see the headscarf, the color. We see the restaurant dining out culture and a women eating only dining out culture. Now, historically, Bangladeshis did not go out to eat. we always invited everyone around our house and around the table or on the floor. Going out to eat is quintessentially a Western thing to do. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, right? And here we see a group of young Bangladeshis who are doing this. But they're also doing it within an Islamic framework, should they choose to. And we see the emergence of a coffee culture, a bookshop culture. The list is endless. A new Islam for a new generation. Colourful, vibrant, playful, innocent. In stark contrast to the negative rhetoric we hear of extremism, radicalisation, Prevent and ISIS. This is what it means to be young British and Bangladeshi. I'm going to finish off by just talking about or referring you to the whole notion of dress. Now here is the notion of the hijabi Barbie. Now that idea, the hijabi Barbie, may sound controversial in actual description, but actually it's not a term coined by myself. I borrowed it from a journalist that I read, Simon Fanshawe from The Guardian. But he speaks of the hijabi Barbie not in derogatory terms. He talks about the notion that this is a new generation of young women who may wear the headscarf, but they're also highly articulate, highly confident, super intelligent, very career focused, and also able to manage the many responsibilities that they have. The cultural responsibilities, the professional responsibilities, the spiritual responsibilities, etc. And what they do, by the way they dress, fashionably, trendy, it's a symbol and as a symbol of resistance and also demand for social justice and recognition. As a social practice, the hijab means different things to each girl who wear it. Religion, culture, fashion, community, identity, privacy, space, protection, power, autonomy, respect, confidence, and as a discouragement to male harassment. We need, therefore, to think of the hijab of not being overwhelmingly tainted with oppression or subjugation, but perhaps there are multiple meanings. And as an ethnographer, my role was to uncover some of these meanings. So some of the girls wore it for fashionable reasons. Some of them wore it because their friends wore it. Some of them, the vast majority of them wore it because they saw it as a religious, a social, a spiritual role. Some of them wore it, then took it off. Some of them didn't wear it and wore it. Some of them wore it in family occasions. Some of them wore it all the time. Right? Some of them wore the niqab, as we saw earlier. Some of them just wore the headscarf. We need to think of the headscarf as being multiple. There is no one unified way of thinking about the headscarf. And it's also, interestingly... Pardon?
St. Paul said that women should wear it.
St.
Paul. St. Paul.
Okay. Said that women should wear it. We'll come to that. We'll talk about this afterwards. Let me just make these last 2 points. One of the interesting elements also with the headscarf is also resistance internally against Bangladeshi patriarchal practices. Right? Many young, articulate, confident, literate British-born females are different to their mothers and their grandmothers, because the key difference is literacy for a start. Many of these young women are reading Islam for themselves. They're accessing the internet, they're reading about it, they go to conferences, they go to university, they go to work circles, they go to the coffee shops, they go to shisha bars, and they're making this Islam for themselves. And when they go home, their version of Islam clashes with the traditional version of the homebound, illiterate Bangladeshi mother, who also wears the sari, which is a complete difference to the headscarf and the hijab. Right? Here is a more of an Arabized Middle Eastern way of practicing Islam, in stark opposition to the Bangladeshi traditional way of practicing Islam. So there are internal factions, internal tensions. And what these young women are doing by dress in the year 2015, they are challenging patriarchal practices. They are telling their fathers and uncles and brothers and husbands, I'm allowed to work, I'm allowed to go to school, I'm allowed to go to university, I have a voice, I have an opinion. And what we here are experiencing and witnessing in the year 2015 is this crossroad, is this tension. And many men, not just many elderly men, but But arguably and interestingly, many young British-born Bangladeshi men are finding it hard to cope with the fact that their girls, the women in their lives and their communities, have a voice and have an opinion. And my study is capturing some of this in a very vibrant and interesting way. So, one girl says, I was forced to wear the hijab when I was young. I do not wear it anymore. I will again, inshallah, in the future when I'm ready. Another one says, my parents never told me to wear it. In fact, my father told me not to wear it. He said it's going to be wrong and detrimental to my career and education. But I chose to wear the headscarf. It's important to me. It's part of who I am. It's part of my identity. And one other says, sometimes I wear the headscarf when I'm out in my relative's home. Other times I forget. Sometimes I don't wear it when I go to the cinema with my friends. But I do understand that it's important. It's a mark of respectability and deep faith. Right? So we hear it from them. It means different things to them. So, in conclusion, let me make just one thing clear. This is a debate which has no clear-cut answers or solutions. We all have something to say in these matters. We all have different experiences and we all have an opinion. I contribute, or my research, my study contributes to an existing debate. And let me reiterate the core argument of my study, that these matters of identity, non-belonging are complex and also very serious, tragic and traumatic for those that it affects. However, in seeking an Islamic-orientated identity by many young British Bangladeshis, it gives them a sense of comfort, belonging and acceptance. I therefore argue for a more positive interpretation of British Islam. And this is where my localized research chimes in with a more national and international agenda. The popular Orientalist discourse is one that's constructed Islam in the year 2015 as being problematic, as singular and monolithic, that we all adhere and agree to this terroristic, violent ideology, that we're all criminal, backwards and un-British. It's a religion that's been depicted by images of the Taliban and images of mass violence in Iraq and Syria, of angry men in swords and with 10 wives, and this is the Orientalist popular imagery. And that we're all engulfed in this war of terror, and we don't like anyone who's Western. In many ways, my book and my research contests these problematic Orientalist images, and it proposes a more positive version of British Islam. I've also tried to retell the stories of what it means to be them through their perspective. The debate continues. Who I am, where do we belong? This notion of the ping pong generation. These are some of my key hashtags in the whole Twitter crazy world that I've become engulfed in. And I'm happy to have a discussion now with you, everyone here, and also carry on this discussion beyond the scope of this room. Here is my email, there is my Twitter account. I'm happy to take on questions, I'm happy to meet afterwards at another time, because this debate is important not just to me, but also to our community. Thank you for listening to me.
Because when you showed the picture of you told the story of Nikki, I think it was, with the niqab and, having a sort of identity, almost a physical identity of clothes and stuff, Western clothes, underneath her jilbab. I mean, that to me straight away made me think about, well, what is she negotiating here in terms of identity? And I think, from my experience of being a British Bangladeshi in this community, a lot of women, especially, I think boys, men do it as well, but they negotiate a lot in terms of maintaining a certain perception in the community. So I just want to know your thoughts on that and how much you came across that.
The concepts of ijat and shame, shamaj, the community, what they think, these were highly pivotal. I mean, arguably, as a conceptual tool, those two words of ijat and shamaj underpin traditional Sylheti rural culture, right? They govern everyday politics. What are people going to think? What is the neighbour going to say? You can't wear this in public. I've got a face to show. Yeah, you're bringing shame upon the family. These are of course, they're hugely influential governing factors in the lives of these young people. But some are challenging this. Some are actually telling one young person told, not a part of this study, but I know him through my youth work background. For those of you that don't know, and why would you? My background, in my previous life, I used to be, some of you know this, I used to be a youth worker in Tower Hamlets. Now I've gone into the bonkers world, or the banana world of... Yeah, sorry. Well, not in the way you're thinking. Yeah, I'm thinking more in the bonkers world of academia. Yeah, where, thank you for correcting me. So I've not left my youth work background, but I'm still involved in it, but not as much as I would like to. And one young person, he had this dialogue with his father about the national lottery, and he was telling his father how it's wrong and it's un-Islamic and it's a form of gambling for you to play £1 every week in the national lottery. And his father was saying, first of all, who are you to tell me you're my son? And second of all, it's only £1. I don't see it as a form of gambling. It's just something I do. And if we strike you rich, you're going to benefit, son. But that was enough for the son to leave home. That ideological difference was enough for the son to say, actually, and obviously this was the pinnacle of something far more going on between father-son relationship. But he used that as a reason to move out. He just said, my parents are not Islamic enough for me. Right, so many young people were contesting this. The situation with Lippy, she was very feisty, very articulate, very confident. She confidently said to me, why don't we go for a shisha in Mile End? Right? Whereas her friend Taiba did not want to do that, because it was all about, despite her leaving home, despite her drinking, and despite her falling out with her parents, she still did not want to be seen in that environment in case somebody saw her, because it would bring shame upon her family. Right? But Lippy was completely opposite. She didn't care. Right? And I think the reason why I chose those two stories is to show you the diversity within the experience of what it means to be young British and Bangladeshi. Not everyone sees it in the same way. But those notions of shame and honour and izzat and shamaj were important.
So in terms of the hijab, from my experience of close friends and other women like me in the community, sometimes it's, I'm not saying it's for everybody, but for a lot of women that do wear the hijab, it is a good tool in terms of managing family relations. So I've seen that, if a girl who doesn't wear it, for example, has a lot of friends that do wear it, sometimes her parents trust her a bit more because she's in the right crowd. Or if she's wearing it and they think she's safer in a lot of ways, they trust her more in terms of those kind of things that would be deemed shameful. So they think, actually, no, she's not going to go, she's not going to free mix, she's not going to,
Yeah, and of course we know, and of course, thank you for raising it. Of course we know that's not true, because many young girls wear a headscarf and they still have boyfriends, and they hold the boyfriend's hand in the streets of Shadwell, Watney Market, and this very Whitechapel High Street. Many young girls wear the headscarf and they smoke spliff. They smoke a cigarette. The headscarf doesn't automatically denote religious and spiritual devotion. For a vast majority, of course it does. It's a spiritual journey, it's a physical journey, and the majority have made it of their own choice. Some of them have done it, like you said, because their friends wear it, and some of them play the game. One young girl said, I know how to play the game. I know because I wear the headscarf, my parents are less concerned about me when I go out, and as soon as I started wearing the headscarf, I could now come in at home at 7, 8 o'clock as opposed to 5 o'clock. I could just push that boundary a little bit more, and they were not that worried about me. And some young people are young people, they're savvy. Right? They're teenagers, they know what to do. Just because they're Muslim or Bangladeshi, it doesn't take them away from being young. They're just like most other young people. Let me take that question and then I'll come to you, madam.
Can you think of a similar issue, the British Bangladeshi boys or men having? Because you will probably notice in your 45 minutes in terms of referencing, I would say probably Muslims you're talking about rather than Islamic. Islamic would be even more complex things to deal with. So we are mostly talking about British Bangladeshi Muslims rather than Islamic, because Islamic could be, that could be even more complex and problematic. But my question is, could you think of any example, like, for example, you have shown Lippy in a niqab, and immediately that gave us a lot of questions, a lot of concern, a lot of picture, and we were team new to the debate. But what I'm asking for is to imagine a similar picture of a boy, which will also give, can be used as a trigger of an really controversial identity. You know my question?
I think.
Anybody in the audience?
Niqabis, they do everything wearing the niqab. I used to work split appointments ago. I've seen some guys with suits, white attires.
Let's say we have this guy wearing a tube in that picture. Do we see any problem there? No. Let's just imagine.
So what you say? Okay, in terms of iconic images, we're talking the international images. You're saying when you if you were to type in, I mean, Google is a useful barometer for this, right? So if you go into Google Images and you type Muslim women, that image will come up, right? If you were to type Muslim men, you're asking me what image would come up, right? And
Not just that. In terms of when we are having the debate and when we are having this conversation, it's dominated by this idea of what women should be wearing or not, and how we have inherited this, from the 7th century cultural practice. And somehow it has, through culture or through whatever interpretation, we are debating this in 21st century, in 2015. And where a very educated and learned man like yourself is also studying, you'll see that overwhelmingly, you're actually having to focus on girls, women, and probably 25% of your observation and debate is taken by one issue, which ultimately relates to hijab.
Yeah. Can I just come back to you on that before I just take those two comments? You're absolutely right. I had 30 minutes today to speak about this, and I've chosen this to speak about. But in 2 weeks' time, I'm doing a lecture at Goldsmiths, right? And I have an hour to do it with my students. And of course, because of the timing, because I have more, that I do focus much more on young men also. So it was more of a timing issue than anything. But also, the thing that I've done through this book is only speak about issues that are important to the young people. The key question I went into the research with is, who are you? That was my number one question. And I kept on asking this to them every single, and they kept on telling me.
You're almost appealed for a positive interpretation of Islam at the end, following your research. So I'm assuming, because you've done a qualitative study of 6 persons, and then obviously you have gone into making the conclusions. Either you have, you wanted to always make, this is the weakness of researcher, and you ask for a positive interpretation of Islam with the backlight of Islamophobia, as we've mentioned sometimes. And this is where I'm finding it problematic, is that we are actually also somehow outward focused, and rather our internal struggles are suffering. For example, the debate within ourselves in gender equality within Islam, debates of how much we should reinterpret, re-understand Islam, and so on, and how actually morality is thrust upon us just on the basis of sexual morality. And that's what actually every single parents are worried about when their daughter is going out wearing a hijab or not, is ultimately sex. Is ultimately because it's not a boy. If a boy going out at 10 o'clock wearing whatever, it's not a concern. But if a girl, even wearing a hijab, she's coming home at 8 o'clock, it's a concern. Can you see? So I'm quite critical of that whole approach or the whole trend where we actually trying to just start shooting the Islamophobia card and also blaming the West and so on. I'm saying this rightly so. We have that definitely exists. I'm not denying that. But I'm saying that should not be a scapegoat for our ignorance that we have from so.
Can I? So to cut you off, can I just take your name?
My name is Trentham Books.
Trentham Books, yeah?
Yes.
Right, I think we're...
I'll text you.
No, I think, to be honest, I think we're singing from the same hymn sheet, because everything you've just said, I don't disagree, I actually agree. And this is not to plug this book, but the concluding chapter just says exactly what you've just said, right? It locates the narrative within... Yeah, it locates the narrative within the wider Islamophobic and global war on terror agenda. But in fact, in the conclusion, one of the key things emanating from it is what needs to happen imminently is an intra-community dialogue and discussion over these complex issues of ijat, shame, samaj, the gender dynamics, young youth deprivation, alienation, the disconnection of language. These are things that need to be sorted out internally. So that's one of the key conclusions.
I'm not going to take time. You know, in this picture, you can see, I mean, I've discovered this, I don't know, was it an intentional or was it, I don't know, some people may find it offensive. As you can see, the woman who's wearing or pretending to be wearing hijab, her undergarment straps is visible and some skin as well. Now, I'm telling you, if some mullahs out there, they really see that, they will probably say, you know, this is a humiliation, this is a, you know, this is a video.
Yeah.
I think it's a model one.
Yeah. But I know what you're saying, and we can have a discussion afterwards. Yeah. Yeah. So let me.
That lady was next.
So go on, yeah, and then the gentleman at the back.
So blatantly, I'm not Bangladeshi. I'm blatantly a woman. And if you get to know me for a little bit of time, you will know that I'm blatantly from the East End. And my Lagagor, and most Bengali people go, oh, isn't that cute? She knows how to say it in Sylheti. But she is my Lagagor. And she has taught me how to be a good neighbour. And she's 75, and she's got a Mr. Abdul Rahim, Mr. Shouty, breaks furniture occasionally, needs to be taken to the hospital, but she's her husband. And as long as he doesn't have to be my husband, that's good enough.
You got a question?
But my point is, over 5 years, without any language between us, we, as two women, with probably 4,000 miles between us, and definitely at least 30 years between us, have become good friends and good neighbours. And that's what living in East London is about. And I understand that if I need to look at something in her back garden, I either have to go all the way around the back, or I have to take my shoes off and come through her kitchen. And she's taught me so much. Thank goodness I don't have to put up with a husband like that.
Thank you for sharing your stories. No, I think that story is really important because
I didn't take as long as he did.
No, I think your story is really important because you're absolutely right. This is, for me, this is what living in East London should be about. But there are the nasty stories also. I mean, my overwhelming memory of growing up in Bethnal Green was of playing in the football concrete pitch in an estate just near the Haggerston Park, and the local white boys, as we knew it then, used to come in with their pit bulls, their dogs, and just let it loose because they thought it was a nice game to let the dogs loose on the local Bengali Paki boys. And that's my memory. Of course I know that life is not that simple. It's not always black and white. As I've grown up, some of my best friends now, even to this day, are Richard and Harry.
They're white.
Yeah, and just to comment on your human story that you said, you know, they come to my house and celebrate Eid, and I go to their house and celebrate Christmas, and we've become best friends. Our kids are best friends, and that's what life can be. This is the model that I will definitely propagate. And I know, once I've been exposed to a different world, that whiteness and racism do not go hand in hand. But when I was growing up, absolutely, I thought that all white people were racist. But until I was exposed to genuine, nice, sincere white people, my life was black and white until I was exposed to the other. So thank you for sharing that story. So there was a question at the back from the gentleman. It's gone, sorry. I don't know who else had their hands up. Was it?
My question goes back to the very interesting term hijabi Barbies, and the future with these Barbies. I mean, for example, in Islam, a Muslim man ideally should marry another Muslim woman, and I mean, in circumstances you can marry people of the book like the Jews or the Christians. But with these hijabi Barbies, and especially the Asian ones, I mean, they become very it's become very challenging now for both for boys and the girls to kind of relate to one another, because they equally want to sort of show who's the boss. They equally want to sort of show who's wearing the trousers. I mean, now you've got the table is turned now. Now you've got hijabi Barbies, I mean, are earning like in 60, 70 grand, and compared to their brothers or their husbands who are earning like 20, like less than 15 even in a lot of cases, not in all cases. Now this is posing a new problem for the Bangladeshi family or the Muslim family, and from a sociological perspective, which you are. Have you ever done any sort of research into what's causing all the high level of divorces in the community, what's causing marital breakdowns and problems? Are these the underlying problems, and what are the future for these type of?
I think that's a very, very important question. First and foremost, I'm not a marriage counsellor, so I can't answer that. But as a sociologist, you do raise a very important point there about the whole tension between the masculine and feminine notions and concepts of identities. And I would, using this as an example, I would argue that this tension that you've just highlighted is across the board. It's across the spectrum. It's a global issue. It's not.
The women feminists.
Yeah, absolutely. This is not limited to the Bangladeshi or Muslim community. It's a universal issue, and you see lots of.
Universal issue like reading the Quran.
And I would say it's not a bad thing. I think it's quite positive. I think it should be embraced. I think all social change historically has always been propagated by the educated woman.
Advocates of women's rights was Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah, and the only tension.
But there is gender roles. And if you go into that.
Yeah, the only tension now is that this articulate, confident, intelligent, career-focused, educated Bangladeshi woman. The tension she's experiencing is the resistance versus the patriarchal fathers, uncles, and grandfathers. Not in all households. In a vast majority, there are some very open-minded, quite middle-class, quite liberal thinking families out there. But also, this is the key interesting point here. They're also facing this tension with the British-born, educated, so-called liberal men also, who are definitely finding it difficult to cope with the fact, like you just said, that their wife earns more than them, and also perhaps is articulate and intelligent, has a voice and an opinion.
Some circumstances to do with racism, again, this glass ceiling effect, where, I mean, what I'm saying might turn out, I mean, might seem quite controversial, but through anecdotal evidences and stuff, I've seen that, mostly. I mean, women tend to get more jobs than guys do in certain circumstances. And it's to do with, I know it's to do with.
I'm disappointed.
Which isn't.
No, actually,
I'm not sure. I'm not against women.
Well, are you talking about in the Bangladeshi community or generically? You're talking about
I'm not
in the Bangladeshi community. Okay. Right.
It might be to do with factors such as women are, earning better. A grade, whatever, doing better educationally or otherwise. But I mean, to be honest,
but if you're a better candidate, it's to do with socialization.
Should be more.
I agree with you to some degree in the sense that I think it's to do with socialization. Like the way British Bangladeshi girls have been brought up, that shame and honor thing is like drilled from like the moment they're born. And boys, in comparison, they've got a bit more freedom, they've got a bit more time to make mistakes and stuff because they settle down and be a good husband. So by the time a woman, a British Bangladeshi girl, let's say we're looking right now, my sister's time it was like what, 18, 19 when it was expected for them to get married in this country. But now it's like no problem.
That's when you in the 30s.
Yeah, but I think 25. Yeah.
25 plus.
Yeah. So, but now it's sort of like, by the time the girls are sort of at the age ready to get married, they are more qualified, they're more educated, because they haven't messed about. They've just followed all the rules, they've stayed within societal structures.
Okay, all right. Can I just intervene? This is a great debate, and I don't want to dilute it, but can I just intervene with just, and I'm putting on the academic hat here, okay? You're having a great debate here, and this goes back to your whole idea of the internal debate. We need to have this debate around dinner tables and in circles like this. Just to throw in statistics are always horrible. Yeah, I do. Yeah, this is right. Let me just throw in some from a nationally speaking. Men still earn more than women. Men are still likely to get higher position jobs. National speaking, yeah.
I think a sweet generalization was made by this lady here. She said that men are allowed to mess about and then they fix themselves, and as if like women have a smooth path into career.
I was just talking that situation presented.
Can I also speak to that also? I think that's also a problematic position, because young men from all cultures, not just Bangladeshi cultures, they have their own inherent structured problems. The idea that men are all playful and they've got no they've got no pressures on them and they can make mistakes. That in itself is problematic. That point, I know what you were trying to say, and this cuts across not just Bangladeshi men, young men. I think it's all young men, and also there's a problem of unemployment, austerity. Not knowing what to do once they get after graduation. In terms of going back to the Bangladeshi situation, yes, statistically, girls are outperforming men from the Bangladeshi community at GCSE, A-level, and at degree level. That has been a trend that's become apparent.
What census are you referring to? Which census? Is it current one? Is it the?
You've got to look at all the latest educational.
But the question is that translating into the labour market, into employment? Because
no, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. And that's the.
Why doesn't it? Because if you look at countries like Jordan, it's the same thing. In Jordan, give a really massive example, but the women are so highly educated, but they're not in jobs.
Yeah, in this country.
Syria, Iraq, and here, across the board, not just in the Bangladesh.
In this country.
We're doing better than you, and we're not.
Okay, all right. This isn't. Look, I don't want this to turn into this gender argument. This is an age-old argument, and there's never going to be a full stop. It's an important debate, and it should happen. But the one thing I would say to this is that you're absolutely right. That even though Bangladeshi young women are outperforming men at GCSE, A-level, and GCSE level, degree level, once they enter the job market.
We need to refer to
The Bangladeshi community. I'm referring to the Bangladeshi community.
What census in terms of
this is
about 10 years ago.
No. I'm referring to the latest census, 2011, and I'm also referring to up-to-date DFES statistics and grades up until last year. Right, you just got to look at them. Bangladeshi women are outperforming young men. There are a whole host of reasons why that is. We never know. There are a whole host of sociological, educational reasons why that is. But the problem remains, and this is the institutional racism that's inherent in this country, is once they do enter the labour market, they're on an equal platform. Right? Women who wear the headscarf are being discriminated against. Women who are South Asian and do not wear the headscarf are still being discriminated against. There have been numerous qualitative studies that have shown that employers do not want to employ women from a South Asian background because they think they're going to become pregnant and mothers at a later date. They may be the best candidate for the job, but later on, absolutely. So there's all these sociological problems that emerge, right? And going back to something you said earlier, just before I go to yourself.
I wanted to say exactly that. So
yeah, this notion of structured racism, unfortunately, is the everyday reality, and that affects all people of colour, not just, and also white working class young boys and girls. It's not just an ethnic issue, right? It's quite indigenous and it relates. I mean, look, in all honesty, if we're going to have a class debate, the people who are benefiting most from this are white, privileged, middle class people. right? They're the people that benefit from the situation that we're seeing here. The period of austerity that we're living in, the only people who are going to benefit from this are white middle class privileged people with connections and financial healthy bank accounts. And that's the reality.
A pyramid structure where obviously it seems to be the Asians or the Bangladeshis are right at the bottom.
Well, Bangladeshis and Pakistanis are the most disadvantaged up until the last census.
Despite a huge improvement in education and...
They're still disadvantaged in terms of housing, education, profession, income, crime rates, health rates, all the barometers you can think of, they rank low. Now that is once again, going back to something you said earlier, sir, we need to have that internal discussion, how we rectify this, right? Despite being here over 50, 60 years, Bangladeshis are still there and there's something going on. There's something that's stopping them from, I would argue, this is a very positive spin on this, I would argue that this very generation here will have a big say in what happens in the future. So now we are seeing a professional circle of bankers, lawyers, doctors, teachers, lecturers, etc. This is a new circle, and this circle will have a very positive impact on the new born generation.
More sociologists rather than imams, because those imams were supposed to be community leaders.
Well, I think the picture.
That's a sociological idea too.
Yeah.
That's what we need more sociology.
Well, before I get to John, I think in the picture, and I'm willing to put a wager on this. In 20, 30 years' time, I think the picture will be very different. I think we're seeing a new group of middle-class Bangladeshis emerging, and they are also having they're giving their students, their children tuition, they're sending them for private tuition, they're taking them around the world, they're exposing their kids to different things, they're teaching them Chinese, Spanish, Mandarin at an early age, they're sending them to ballet lessons, violin lessons. There's that new group emerging, and you'll see the picture emerge. The problem is, and this is problematic from a community perspective, is once you gain or once you become middle class, what is it that you leave behind and what is it that you gain? That is also a question that we need to have a discussion on.
Then that opens up a discussion of internal racism.
Is internal racism, and also what do we lose? We lose culture, we lose language, we lose tradition, we lose history.
All the cream of the town are moving out, apparently.
Yeah, and that happened in all communities historically as well. John, sorry, you had a question.
As the only person here who could possibly be described as white middle class, I'm not a racist. I don't think I have ever been that, but I do want to ask you if you can just take a wrench away from, I'm not involved in gender struggles and I'm not involved in reaching glass ceilings or any other material ceilings anymore, but there is something you alluded to and almost said, well, I'm not going to go there, and I wonder if you would go there, because having read your book, and I do commend it to anyone that hasn't, because it's a very thorough read. But there's something that has stood out very strongly for me. I'm part of a group of people, some of whom are here, who are very concerned about Bengali culture, big time. Now, as the outsider for that group, what I have to say about Bengali culture is that the more I engage with it, the richer it rewards me. And I have a friend from the other side of the subcontinent who says, oh yes, that's a good area to be, it's a good place to be exploring that, because Bengal always has been the spiritual brain box, the engine room of the whole subcontinent. And this is what I find, and that's why I'm very thrilled and rewarded by everything that I do in that space. Having read the first half of your excellent book, I'm really quite alarmed at a comment that you make, which is that in Britain, for third generation Bangladeshis growing up here, Bengali as a language is really in serious decline. And I have a concern that if these Bengalis are in fact doing their education in English, they will end up knowing more about Shakespeare, if they know anything about literature, than they will about Tagore or Lalon Shah. Now, I do find this really quite disturbing, because with a shift away from their own language, there is also a shift away from access to the culture that gives them strength and potentially gives them identity wherever they go. And it also seems to me that if that shift is characterized by a drift towards Arabic as an alternative language that gives you access to that whole world of spirituality and of art and of culture in general. It isn't Bengali culture, it is the culture of a religiously driven world which has now become a symbol to us white middle class non-racists, even something to be really scared of. Now, I live amongst Bengali people, and what comes across to me by that experience is that during Ramadan, on 11 occasions, the door was knocked, we were given iftar, food, greetings, everything that you could possibly wish for. If that's a product of Bengali culture, I'd like to hear more of it, but I'm worried about the possible decline of it on account of the drift towards a language which is not their own. Have you any comments?
John, I think I share your worries. Thank you for raising that question of language and the importance of language. There are multiple issues going on in regards to the Bengali language. Now, when we speak about Bengali language, first and foremost, let's qualify this by saying this is a particular Sylheti rural language, not the Bengali language of Tagore and his contemporaries. Secondly, there is the issue of literacy. Now, our parents, overwhelmingly, the Sylheti migrants who came in the 50s and 60s came from 5 or 6 districts of Sylhet, and they were mainly rural illiterate farmers. Right? This is the heritage, this is the background, the history that they came here with. But they came here and they inherited menial, everyday, manual jobs. Education was important, of course, but it wasn't a key concern. The key concern was to work, to earn money, and to send money remittances back to Bangladesh, the country the motherland. Now, the area of Bengal that you're talking about, Rabindranath Tagore, you're absolutely right, is the enlightenment, the hub of intellectualism within the South Asian region. But that world of Rabindranath Tagore is lost, unfortunately, in the Sylheti culture, mainly because of the discrepancies between literacy. Our parents did not read Rabindranath Tagore, they were told about Rabindranath Tagore through oral tradition. And I think the other thing, worryingly, that's happening, and this is a great anecdotal example which highlights your concern and the rightful concern that you've raised. 15, 20 years ago, every single Saturday school in every single school in this borough, we're talking weekend classes or after school classes, 15, 20 years ago, if you went to them, they would be brimming with Bengali language classes because their parents knew the importance of language and how language gives you access to culture, heritage and identity. Right? Now if you go to any school in Tower Hamlets or any youth club and you go to after school clubs or language classes, they will be brimming with Arabic classes. Right? Yes, there are still some Bengali classes that go on, but we're talking attendees maybe 10s or 20s in comparison to the Arabic classes in their hundreds, right? And that anecdotal example tells you about this ideological political shift that we've encountered. Now, when I speak to the young people, the very young people that we're speaking to out here, these young Bangladeshis from the East End of London, and I ask them, what does Bengali mean to you?
They're young Londoners, they were born here.
Absolutely, yeah. Some of them have said that to me. Some of them said, well, why are you calling me Bengali? I'm a Londoner. I'm an East Londoner. Right? But some of them also were very proud of their Bangladeshi heritage. Yeah. And some of them understood the importance of Bengali to their culture and heritage. Some of them said that Bengali had no relevance in their lives. One of them, I can't find the quote now, in the book he says, Aminul, tell me, is Bengali going to get me a job? Right? He said that to me, and I said to him, well, it may not get you...
Me a job.
Huh?
It's got me a job.
It's good.
I'm an interpreter.
You're an interpreter. Well, he wanted to work in the city, right? So he had grand ambitions of becoming a banker. And to be honest, 7 years down the line, he has done what he wanted to do, right? He's moved into Canary Wharf and he's got the nice apartment and he's got that vision. But what he asked me is Bengali, tell me the relevance of Bengali in my life. Will it get me a job? And I said to him, it may not get you the job you want, but do you understand the relevance of it to your culture and community? And he said, no. The word he used to describe Bengali was, well, I don't want to learn Bengali, right? He was almost mimicking and patronizing this great oral literary tradition, right? So for them, it holds no relevance. And unfortunately, what's taken shape or what's replaced Bengali is this symbolic power of Arabic as a religious and spiritual and social movement, but also universally the power of English. And we see it. I mean, here I am propagating and preaching to you that Bengali is so important to identity, heritage and culture. And here I go home every single day and speak English to my 3 children at home. And I do that, and at the end of the night, me and my wife, who's also a teacher, we speak to ourselves in English and broken English, Banglish, combination of both, and we ask ourselves, what are we doing? But because it's a force of habit, because we're engulfed into this neoliberal, capitalist, hard-working life, when we go home, we haven't got the time or the energy to speak to our children in Bengali. They go and speak to my parents who only speak Bengali, right? They speak English to my parents and my parents speak Bengali to them. There's 2 different languages, but they understand each other somehow. There's also a technological divide. My 6-year-old sits on grandfather's lap and gets him on YouTube and says, Dada, look at this, right? He then takes him out into the garden and says, this is how you grow khodo, right, pumpkins, right? This is how you do dulafata, how you go. So what's been lost through the oral tradition is being replaced by symbolic actions of culture and tradition. Gardening, heritage, farming, agriculture, Sunday afternoon get-togethers. These are symbolic events that we still take part in. But unfortunately, the language is being lost. What we do as a community to regain this is once again an internal discussion that needs to happen.
Just want to point out, in Bangladesh, in rural and in urban, nearly everybody learns Arabic. Not how to speak well, but just to read the Quran. In the rural, everybody learns.
Yeah.
So I can't see what's the problem in people doing Arabic.
Exactly.
Why is it people learning Bengali? That's might be the problem.
The problem is here, in Bangladesh, when people are learning Arabic, I've walked to madrasa in the morning to learn, Qaeda, Sifara, and then learning how to read Quran. That was one project from mainly decision of parents to make sure their children are equipped with basic or has access to basic religious texts. But here, in the vacuum of, or even with the context of racism and struggle of the Bengali community, and as you have rightly mentioned, in looking for an identity, they have been pushed, and only thing that we find is the Islam project. And where it actually comes is imposed Arab or Arabization, which is much easier than really, preaching the authentic Islam. That has happened. So it's 2 very different contexts. So if you ask an Islander, would you prefer to be an Arab or a Bengali or Bangladeshi? He would say Arab, because his Islamic identity.
Have you done research on that?
Sorry,
Have you asked 100 people?
I have, yes.
Only men.
Well, I'm an East Londoner, and I don't agree with what you've said, and have a lot of what you've said. And I think much of what you say is personal experience, and
Yes,
I really
yes.
appreciate if you made that clear from the onset, that the
Sure.
audience might take it as being an experience for all Asian men.
Let me give you an example. If you just probably make a list of structured or organized projects that have been taken in last 20 to 25 years, where actually Islam as a religion played the catalyst role in actually shaping people's lives. So starting from your library project to saving boys from drug addiction and so on, the only way that was forward is going back to your religion. And it has worked. It has worked for many families and many, probably for second generations. And you find most of the leadership in this community and the organizations that are being led are people from those particular projects, where actually parents decided, hold on, we're in an unknown alien territory here. We will either be lost in the Western invasion of culture and so on, my children will be drunkard, or we have other option, and what is that? It's Islam. And what then came the Islam holder, or the project of starting from Jamaat Islam to Darul Ummah to other people. They have perfectly taken that opportunity to sell their version of Islam, and that's why you see we are discussing or whatever. I'll say that
That's a very politicized experience that you share, but if I can give you my part of what you're thinking, I think what you talk about is people's experience to take and fill the vacuum are not just Islamic values, but they're universal values. So if you go to Bharat, where there's predominantly non-Muslims who make up the vast majority of an ethnic group, you'll find that there are Christian, Jews and Buddhists and Hindus who do very similar work for their community. So it would be wrong to say that it's an Islamic thing to do, that in the case of a vacuum or an unmet need, that religious groups get together to determine a wider plan. I think that's a very natural process for humans generally.
Come to the price. If you think of the missionaries that went to India and other countries, I mean, they did very, very good work for those many communities. So even Africa. Well, what did it come with? It comes with, other attachment, other conditions, other programming. So I totally understand. It's not an universal thing that with whatever identity people coming forward to safeguard these individuals and young people. And what happens later is quite dangerous. Because then you're actually giving a whole
That's a social phenomenon, isn't it?
No, it's not a
Rather
social
than one of the deeper plans.
Can you go to a new person? She has not question you.
We can just before I take your queries, once again, I'm not batting this away. These are deep questions of the whole colonial history, the social program of religions and communities, not just Islam, but as you rightly said, other religious groups have done this, have and continue to do this. I think one thing to interject here, just because many of these young Bangladeshis either wear a headscarf or have a beard or wear the thobe, it doesn't make them religious. That's the one key thing to put here, right? So lots of them are very social. Yeah, lots of them, and that's key to reiterate this diversity, right? Just because they go and practice or pray in the mosque, some people go to the mosque for meditation purposes, not for religious reasons or social reasons to socialize with their friends, and that needs to be emphasized and needs to be something internally discussed. Maybe your experience, but just to say that there is diversity within British Islam. There is diversity within British Islam, especially in East London, and lots of these young people are making Islam for themselves. What they're doing is they're reconstructing and constructing an Islam for themselves.
So you say diversity of Islam in East London?
There is a huge diversity of Islam in East London.
Predominantly one version.
No, there's a huge diversity of Islam, I think.
It's the ideology of home away from
No, it's
home.
diversity.
So it's kind of
What's
like,
that?
I mean, first generation Bangladeshis, they come with the view of making money, maybe perhaps going buying land back home, perhaps even settling after they've obviously made some money working here. I think of the families of his second generation, third generation, they've realised that they've built a home away from home. They have all access to Arabic classes, masjids, they're freely able to practice their religion, and not many people are now investing back home. Not many people are buying land back home, so that also contributes to the loss of, I guess, Bengali language as such, because nobody's going to think of, okay, you need to go back to speak to your grandparents, to socialise with people back home. It's just not happening. I think there's definitely been a trend where people are not going back to Central and work over there as well. So I think that contributes to why the language is gone. But not that it's like we said, but culture is still there. And I'm actually proud to be a Bengali.
So am I.
Bangladeshi culture. I wouldn't find myself as sort of being. I see what you mean by Arabization and how it can be quite prominent. When you go through the Islamic route, it can be there. But it's individual families. I think that my parents taught me. They drilled it in. Just how to be. What it means to be Bangladeshi, from the food we eat to the things that we do, the etiquettes we have when we get over guests to our house, and things like this are still very profound, I think, in the Bengali community. That's my opinion.
You're going to come in.
Well, I was just saying that what you're talking about, and with Islam, because when our parents or our grandparents came to the UK, their faith was quite strong for them, and obviously it was a source of comfort.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But the Islam that I knew when I was a kid, the Islam that exists today, is very different.
Yeah.
And this is, I agree in some respects to what this gentleman is saying, but your whole methodologies I don't believe
Oh yes, that's probably.
Yeah.
You might be thinking a bit color
You know,
vision.
your whole methodology is like.
When you say etiquette, like we've been taught in Bengali, say thank you to whoever.
Yeah, but listen, I'm speaking now, excuse me.
Yeah, let him
Hold
speak.
on. Yeah, you've had quite a long time to speak, and most of what you said is quite nonsense actually.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I want to say instead of let me speak.
No, but anyway, what I'm basically saying is when our parents and our grandparents came to this country, you have to remember they were immigrants and they were quite weak and they were attacked by racists or other people that didn't understand what they were about. Blah, blah, blah. You know, they came here to take away white people's jobs. You know, everybody's faith is a strong conflict for them. You know, so you had all these Islamic things that was happening, but as I said, you know, Islam then to Islam now is very different.
Just before I get to this gentleman who's been raising his hands, I'm not ignoring you. Just to echo what you just said, I think I'd absolutely share your argument there. And if you look at the patterns of history, that's exactly what's happened, the immigration history. But the difference practicing the social practice of Islam, I guess the biggest difference is the younger generation are a literate generation. That's one of the key distinctions.
No, but the only thing that's for me.
Yeah, but what they're doing through literacy is they're learning Islam for themselves, and it's not the oral historical tradition. So what's happening is they are now saying, well, actually, Mum, Dad, you told me I should do this and do that. But actually, that's not what Islam says. Islam tells me that I should, in fact, Mum, you shouldn't be wearing the sari. And Mum, no, you don't have to walk 10 yards behind Dad on the streets all the time. What kind of Islam is that? Islam tells us that you should be walking side by side with Dad on the streets. You know, women are equal as men. So they're getting this new form of social as well as spiritual and theological prominence through their reading of Islam. And they're mainly accessing it because they can read.
No, but you're talking about Islam on that side, but on the other side of it, you know, being a Bengali identity, you know, we talked about the Bengali language and things like that, for example. But, you know, I always think that the more you know, if you knew how to read Bengali, if you knew how to write, if you knew how to explore things, then obviously that makes you a strong character within that society. But what I'm trying to say is the difference that I'm seeing now, I mean, I still can't fathom in my head, you know, why a Bengali girl would go to Syria, for example. You know what I mean? It just doesn't compute inside my head. You know, and I'm kind of like thinking, you know, we as a society of Bengalis who first came to the UK to work and, you know, we lived here, our families here, our children here. Do you know what I mean?
Society changes, you know.
Huh?
In 30 years ago, you were a Marxist. They're not Marxist anymore.
But I'm just trying to fathom in my head, you know, what's happened, what's snapped within our community that we haven't been able to pass on, what's important to us as a cultural, you know.
Become diverse.
There's a gentleman at the back. Gentleman at the back there.
We're allowed to have anarchist
Yeah.
answers, but not of that nature. Bengali people, you know, historically, we've never been violent actually.
I'll come back to you on that afterwards. Let me just take a few points.
I think I certainly agree to much of the debate about losing the Bengaliness, and I'll make a very small example. My nephew is 4 years old, and his father asked him, would you like to go to Bangladesh? So I said, no, everything is broken in Bangladesh. And what he means by that is what he sees on media, the Bengali newspapers are handed out free on Fridays, and it's about wars, about murder, it's about oppression and all of that, and that's the perception. So what interest and what fantasy will he have of a country where his perception are broken?
I pray at home, my family pray at home. Can you have a room or space in the school where I can pray? The teachers saw that as a sign of radicalization. Where does it start and where does it stop? It puts us in a hugely problematic.
We think just by looking at anecdotal evidence of what happens when you almost push things down people's throats, is that you get an adverse reaction, i.e. you become what you're accused of. So I think
the siege mentality.
We've seen the incident of the 3 girls, but I suppose it's not new for us. In 2002, before the terrorism that came in fact, that 2 girls from the Cliche state go to Somalia. And people have forgotten about that, but there was a period of quiet until it comes up again. Yeah. So I think we will see a lot of that, and I think community empowerment is something that will really shape something.
Can I just say something about the whole ISIS thing, because it is important, and you raised it about the 3 Bangladeshi girls from Bethnal Green, 2 Bangladeshi and 1 Somali girl from Bethnal Green. I think young people historically, and historical episodes have shown that young people, and people in general, but especially young, are sometimes driven by an ideology. Sometimes driven by a motive, right? Sometimes you can't connect with that person, like their families were totally unaware. I've met the families, were totally unaware that their girls were going to do this, right? So, I mean, one great example, one of my colleagues in university said, he's a middle-class white man. And he said, you know what, Aminul, I hear this, and I'm not that surprised. I'm shocked, and I feel for them and their families, but I'm not surprised, because in the 1930s, my middle-class father, who was 17, who was a well-to-do, very articulate, affluent, had nothing wrong with his life, right, had his life planned out, he was going to go into the civil service, etc. Overnight, none of us knew about it, he went and joined the anti-fascist movement against Franco in Spain. Overnight, he just went. And when he came back safely, a few years later, he was driven by a motive to fight against fascism. So even though he was an A-grade, well-to-do, white middle-class person, he was gone. Just like in the 50s and 60s, many people went and joined Castro's and Che Guevara's revolution in Central America, from Europe and beyond. Right? Some people are driven by an ideology, and maybe this is what these young girls were. I don't know. I'm not in their mindset. I'm just trying to understand it. But what I'm trying to say that it goes across cultures and religions. It's not a predominantly.
On many levels, we fail. On an educational level, on a societal level, on a religious level.
Yeah, absolutely.
We as a community,
absolutely,
we can't understand these issues and these problems of belonging and identity, then we fail completely.
I think
so. There's a young lady. So just behind you, and then I'll take.
I was going to say, in the early part of the seminar, you mentioned the Bengali girls, they feel disengaged. I was going to say, what do they feel disengaged from? Their heritage, or their families, or the society around them, into their families?
I think young people in general feel disengaged. I think GCSEs, some of them have gone on to do well. The vast majority, unfortunately, aren't. Some of them are drug pushers, some of them are drug addicts, some of them are criminals, some of them are not. This is the real reality for these young people. And Islam, a social version of it, has given them a way of disciplining themselves. And just as an example, in the Sparkbrook area of Birmingham, the same thing has happened with the African Caribbean community. right? The African Caribbean community in their thousands over there have adopted Islam as a way, as a route out of the headed criminalized, gang-related world that they were engulfed in. A bit like the journey Malcolm X took, if you know the history of Malcolm X. And so, once again, this is a story that's mirrored across the world. It's not just a Bangladeshi story. The lady behind you had a...
I have many comments, but I will focus on what you just said. By saying that, I completely understand I'm French, and France has also got these ISIS problems and stuff. If I try to put it simply, what you said was that you feel somehow responsible for not understanding what's happened in the head of these two girls.
Well, we as a society.
No, but you said as a community.
We also as a community.
Yeah, but no.
Why?
You can't put that on the community. Otherwise, you're going back to we are Bangladeshis.
Well, no, I mean, listen, forget we are Bangladeshis, whatever community that we are in. If you have your children or whatever that's needing comfort of their home, of having everything at our fingertips, to go to somewhere like Syria, forget the way we're going. Whatever nation, whatever culture, whatever people we come from,
That could have been detected. The problem for everyone.
Absolutely, but I think it's a societal problem because in France we have these problems as well. We've got young kids from white middle class kids who go. We've got Algerian Moroccans who go. We've got and that's.
Yeah, but isn't that because?
So it's not a community problem. I think it's a societal problem. And by saying we are guilty, we the Bangladeshi community or the Bangladeshis.
No, we as a whole.
As a whole. Yeah. Can I applaud?
Also, you have to remember these problems as arrive.
No, sorry.
Can you shut up, mate? You were talking about
You should shut up.
Come on.
I just finished my sentence.
Let her.
When you say that, the problem is you're taking away the responsibility the government has for this community.
No, but do you not think that also some of these issues that we're having is actually related to financial issues as well? So let's say a lot of this engagement and not feeling part of a certain community, not having the same job opportunities as a white person, not if you go into a certain job interview, for example, as an Asian person, as a black person, and as a white person, there are 3 different opportunities actually.
Or as a woman.
Or as a woman, yeah, there's another one. So what I'm saying is, since the financial crash happened, which is the creation of all of our governments and the bankers, and all of this has happened because, through the 60s and 70s, all of our governments gave away all the powers that they had over the banking system. They gave it away to the bankers. Bankers got greedy. They did all these crooked things, and all of it impacted on our lives. Yeah, not the middle class, upper class people's lives. I'm talking about everybody's life, whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're green, for example.
But it's all socially
and all
engineered.
of that has impacted.
It's socially engineered from the main architect.
You say socially engineered, it's not. I think it's all these idiots making mistakes.
Can I just listening to what both of you are saying, if you haven't noticed it, you're actually saying the same thing. Yeah? You're agreeing, you're not disagreeing. And you're absolutely right. I actually wrote in the national press, I said exactly what you just said. I said this is not a community problem, this is a British problem. This is a national problem, right? But to say that we somehow should have known...
It's an international problem.
Yeah, it's a global problem, absolutely. And I absolutely... I was applauding what you were saying there because absolutely it's a British problem. These are our children. When I say our children, these are British children. Why does it, just because we're from the same cultural community, what makes it, who says that we knew or had some insight as to what was happening? Of course not. And they're also products of everything you've just said, of the financial crisis, of the disconnect from language, culture, community, religion, gendered issues, local area politics, the working class reality of their lives. I mean, they come from neighbouring Bethnal Green. It's one of the most deprived areas in the whole of Europe, let alone UK.
It's easier to talk about that rhetoric that it's a government problem. And I'll give you a small example. Social services. You've got children. You are responsible for your child's attitude, emotion and behaviour. If they display a particular act in school, they come for the parents, right? Because you're the closest and you're supposed to know. Why are they any different from teenagers in their house who decide to run away? Really, as a parent, you should have some dialogue and some detection in place. So really, when we say it's a government problem, and we take social services as an example, as a barometer for checking if that's the case for both, it's not. And I think that's one of the confusion that we have, to what extent our parents, communities, society is responsible for those that are in immediate care?
I would say it's a social problem as opposed to a government problem. But the government is part of the social.
I think just one more time.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak?
Yeah.
You want to say
Le-
Can I just add to that? I mean,
So can we have someone so because time's running out as well.
Time has run out.
We'll come back.
who's hosting this talk? Like,
Yeah.
what?
Go.
Well,
Except
someone
we have-
has to, it's not being
Let the gentleman add to that, and then we'll take. I'm happy to stay on.
Okay, now we'll finish and go to.
Yeah, I was under the impression that, you know, if we have children or whatever, it's all of our responsibility, whether you're, you know, mum, your dad, your uncle, your aunties, your grandparents, your neighbours, to teach certain rules and manners. Do you know what I mean? And I kind of like feel that within the structure that we live in the UK, that structure doesn't exist anymore. You know, I mean, not just the UK, I mean, it's happening more and more in Bangladesh as well, as more and more people are moving into urban, you know, living in flats or living in houses,
The rest of Europe.
That's right, yeah. So what I'm trying to say, I mean, as a whole, I mean, I get the feeling that we as human beings, sorry, it's not just Bengalis, but all of us are actually a little bit fucked, excuse my language. You know what I mean? But my question is, how do we come up with solutions to deal with, you know, little things like this, to make things a little bit better for the next bit? You know, it could be, you know, through culture, it could be through education.
Can you go to you?
These are important questions, by the way.
You need to sum up, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I have 2 points. Firstly, just to follow up, not to encourage more debate in this last bit. I do think the government has a role, and I think the government has found a sense that they thought there's these kids who are educated, they've got health, they've got all these like safety things. Why are they going into this crazy place? And they've just thought, well, it must be the one thing that separates them from other normal teenagers is the fact that they're from a brown community, whether it's Muslim, Bangladeshi, people, wherever they're from. It's just easier to say that's the thing that's different to other teenagers. That's why they're focusing on its responsibility of the Bangladeshi community or the community of people. So that's my personal perspective. And second, just to come back to more your original thesis about how the difference with different generations and how they experience identity in the third generation. I would say actually within just the one generation there's been a massive change. So I just look at the personal example of my parents. They came here, well, my dad came here as a teenager, my mum a bit later. They came very much working class, to be honest, not religious at all, except in the cultural sense. And it's very much like working hard, make your way in the world. It's quite similar to the white working class culture of East London, to be honest. They came and fell into almost the same thing. And then actually, since then, they've gone through so many transformations. So they've now, like, you know, become business owners and then retired. Now they're vaguely middle-aged, vaguely middle class. And they've got to a point where actually going back home to Bangladesh isn't really even home for them anymore. So they're searching for their identity of what they are now, because they had this grand plan, you said, that they would go back to Bangladesh and they've bought their little house and that's where they're going to retire and everything would be, you know, just like they remembered when they left when they were 12 or whatever. And they've gone back and found actually they don't belong there. Their sense of what identity they were trying to impart on their children as is no longer accurate. Like, the way they've remembered it is no longer true. And actually, as a result, they brought me up very conservatively, saying, you know, you should cover up, you shouldn't go out too late, etc. And actually now they've kind of given up on some of that, but at the same time, they've become more religious. My mum started wearing a headscarf because they're looking for a sense of identity too, and that's a common experience, I think, amongst a lot of my friends' parents. I haven't done a study on this, I have no idea about the statistical relevance of that, but the point is, they're looking for that cultural identity themselves. They've turned to the religious bit because they've lost touch with some of their Bengali cultural stuff. My mum can't read or write Bengali or a bit in English, but so she can't quite connect back to that. And her parents have passed away. She doesn't have that link anymore. So instead, she is looking for that vacuum, which, to be honest, is being filled by more Islamic side of things. The mosques that popping up everywhere, including our little rural part of Essex, and no other brown people anyway. But the point is, they're looking for their identity. What they've been trying to impart to us, just growing up with them over the years, has completely changed. And I can understand now, I'm past all that identity searching stage, when my youngest brother at 21 is just getting there, and he's struggling. I can see that because what he's seen me, the older sibling, go through is very different to what he's been told now by my parents. very different to the community that's around him. They're very different to what I grew up with. So just within our 2 generations, I think we've just experienced so much significant social change that in a normal social situation where people haven't moved different countries, that they would maybe experience those sort of changes in, say, maybe 4, 5, 6 generations. But actually, the change has been so intensified, partly because they're a diaspora community now, and partly because of the whole technological thing. Now, it's very easy for me to Google up and read what is the Quran and its interpretation in Saudi Arabia, whereas my parents would never have had access to that form of religion when they were growing up. So actually, as a result, they've experienced that very compact time frame of just 2 generations. That's, I don't know, maybe like 40 years, a whole, maybe 100 years of history and cultural change. And I think as a result, that's why we are all so confused at the last generation of what to do, and there's not that guidance from the community, whoever that is, to say, oh, this is how you should be behaving, this is what real Bangladeshi is, this is what real Islam is, this is real or British, because they don't know, they're not in a position to give that guidance. And as a result, it's coming out in lots of different ways, and I think it's very hard as a result for a Bangladeshi community, whether it's East London or elsewhere, to give an offer back to government and say, this is what Bangladeshis are, this is what Muslims believe, this is not the same as what these terrorists do. It's really hard to go back with that unified voice because there isn't one. It's just in too much flux.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing that, sharing your personal story there. And I think absolutely it speaks to much of what I've been saying. And what you're saying, what you've just shared, essentially, is the global migrant story. This is a global migrant stories. The Italians experience it in America, the Algerians in France, the Moroccans in Belgium, the Turks in Germany, and the Sri Lanka.
Integration and assimilation argument.
Which goes on, but also linked to this is all the issues of class and race, like you highlighted. I think apart from obviously saying you should read my book, which I'm naturally going to say, but I think you should also read Jumpy Lahiri's The Namesake. Has anyone ever read that or seen the movie? It's a great novel, and it speaks to exactly what you've just highlighted, the notion of growing up in a different space and heritage identity, the identity confusion, what you pass down to the new generation, what they inherit, and how the host society doesn't see them as the way they see themselves, and the whole identity disconnect, and how eventually it goes back to one thing, is the notion of what you know best, right? It's a great movie, but the book, the novel, is even far superior. So I would definitely, if you haven't read it, you should definitely read it.
I was wondering, isn't there also something about the value that is given to certain identities compared to others? So how much you feel like you can assume a certain identity because of the value that other people give to that particular identity? So, for example, I don't know, I'm doing my PhD research with young Bangladeshi girls that have gone to university, and some of them, what they told me was that for them this Muslim identity provided them with a source of identity of which to be proud, which wasn't the case with their Bangladeshi identity, because they said, well, if you say that you have more of this nationalistic identity, you're considered as a fascist. Well, if you identify yourself more with the British society, then you're considered a coconut. So it's also about how others perceive the way that you are. And I think that how, like, this society, British society, considers being Bengali or being Italian, Spanish, French, whatever, as a Roma, exactly. Isn't there much of that as well in what kind of identity we can take?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I'm just going to read you. Yeah, I'm going to summarize. Otherwise, we're going to go on forever. Thank you very much for your contributions. I always learn. I say to my students, I learn from them. I say to my children, I learn from them. My children, who are 2, 4, and 6, they say the most remarkable things, and I say, wow, I never thought of it in that way. I've learned from you. Thank you very much for that. Just to speak to you and to summarize, one person said, English is important as it allows me to express myself and also socially interact with my friends. It also allows me to access the internet and will help me secure a good future. I find it difficult to understand and speak Bengali. Bengali holds no relevance in my life. Right? So she's speaking practically practically about the relevance and importance of Bengali. And you're absolutely right, the value they attach to it. Right, economic value, social value, prestigious value.
But they
and they also internalize. And what happens, as the last comment, is what's happened with the social role of Islam is not necessarily the learning Arabic or wearing a headscarf or wearing a toba or growing a beard or going to the Hajj or going to Egypt to learn Arabic. You know, this is all part of a new cultural lifestyle, and it means something to them. And it goes back to something I think the gentleman over there said earlier. It gives them also a sense of identity in numbers. Right, so here you see the Central Foundation School, for example, on the Bow Road. The headscarf is not part of the uniform, but you would think it is because all the girls wear it. It's not mandatory, it's not compulsory, but it gives them a sense of unity in numbers and shared identity. And that's what Islam is playing a role in the lives of these young people. Not in a theological sense, for some yes, but mainly in a social, spiritual and identity context. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.